Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Common Sense Media. I'm Michael Robb, Head of Research at Common Sense. In each episode, we explore different ways that our digital world impacts kids and families, shaping how young people learn and grow at school, home, and in our communities. Today, we're going to be talking about new research looking at how kids and families feel about AI, where they're in sync, where they diverge. I think some of our findings might surprise you. And I have two wonderful people with me today. I have Eisha Buch, our head of teaching and learning, and Kristen Soltis Anderson, a pollster, speaker, and commentator across national media who has appeared on everything from Fox News to MSNBC, Washington Examiner, Huffington Post. Two fantastic people to work with. Kristen is also the founder of Echelon Insights, which is an opinion research and analytics firm that partnered with us on this release, in addition to Lake Research Partners. So I would like to get this conversation started with you, Kristen. Kristen, you worked with us to understand how different generations across political spectrums, across different age groups, feel about and use AI. I think a lot of people feel like this is a fairly nuanced area, that there are some benefits and concerns about its short and long-term impacts on society. But as you were doing this and looking through this, what did you feel were some of the more kind of unexpected or surprising findings that you came across? And why do you think they're noteworthy?
Sure. Well, Michael, first, thank you for engaging me on this work. It is a privilege to have, over the last few years, been able to work with Common Sense Media to study what American families, as well as teens and kids, think about pressing issues, including technology, that are coming their way. So this was a really fascinating project, in part because everything's moving so quickly in the world of AI. And what perhaps shouldn't have been unexpected, but was noteworthy, was that both parents and teens really understand the speed at which the world is changing. And they feel some optimism about some pieces of what that means, but also some significant anxieties, especially about their own sort of personal economic situation, either for themselves as the teens or parents thinking about their own children. We know that in general, kids are going to be a little more tech savvy than maybe their parents are. That's nothing new. But we found that actually in a lot of places, kids and parents shared many of the same worries. Kids and parents alike are both concerned that AI could make it harder for them one day to get a job. That's especially the case of parents of kids under age 18, as well as teens themselves. We have concern about things like the misuse of data, whether privacy is being protected. That's something where kids and teens alike are concerned, even if there are certain areas like misinformation where kids feel like I'll be able to navigate this pretty well, while parents are more alarmed. But in general, we find that I was sort of expecting there to be higher levels of concern from parents, because you worry about your kids. You're concerned about what might happen with them. We find especially moms. I say, as a mom of young children, like, moms in our survey really stick out as an audience that's very concerned about a lot of potential downsides of AI. But at the same time, it is not as though the young people in our survey are just all gas, no brakes. This is going to be fine. This is wonderful. Whether in terms of economics or in terms of things like critical thinking or their own privacy, they do have concerns that they expressed in this survey.
So when you say they are concerned, and you identified, like, parents may have a little bit more concern, what do you think they're seeing or experiencing on the ground already that is generating this concern?
I think some of it is, and this is more of a theory than concrete from our data, but I imagine that they're seeing things pop up in terms of deep fakes, scams, et cetera. And that while they think of themselves as pretty savvy and able to navigate that, they're still worried about it. In our survey, about 3/4 say they're at least somewhat or very concerned about the possibility of something like this happening. So, it's just for folks who are older, we've grown up in a world where scams happened, but they happened along a very different vector, or incorrect information, rumors, news could spread, but in a very different way. Where for today's teens, this is the way that their world is being shaped, and for them, AI is just part and parcel, for the good and for the ill.
Right. It's interesting when I think about, like, my own kids and what I worry about, and just relative to my own experiences using AI and how quickly it's already been integrated, and just thinking through, boy, this is really going to change kind of everything for them, right? Like how it's going to change like their educational experiences, if they go to college, what their college experiences or job training experiences are going to be. And it's very, very hard, I think, at this moment to visualize what the world is going to look like in, 5 years, nevertheless, like 10, 15, 20 years. And like that does generate anxiety for me. I'm sure lots of concern for other parents out there as well. Actually, going back to this learning point, though, we have several findings in this survey that specifically look into how parents and teens think about AI for learning, with parents of kids under 18 and those with kids over 18 are concerned about using AI for schoolwork. We also see that parents and teens are, for both groups, at more than 60% in each group are concerned about AI's impact on creativity and even more so about critical thinking. What else can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so there's this interesting tension that's flowing through a lot of the questions about how teens say they're using AI and the things that they think are useful about it and helpful, sort of paired with the things that they think might go too far or might
Mhm.
be hindering their creativity. So, for instance, when we asked both parents to assess what do you think teens are using AI for and what are
Mhm.
teens actually using AI for, things like using AI for brainstorming is one of the more common things that our teen respondents said they were using AI for. And actually, there was a huge gap on this one between, teens are saying they're using it to brainstorm, but parents don't really think that's happening as much. So the idea of AI supporting the creative process is definitely there for some teenagers. They see the way that it can play a role. At the same time, they do tell us that they're concerned that AI could worsen creativity and critical thinking. And we see in the survey as well that you have a huge percentage, I think it was 80 over 80%, 83% of parents, 83% of young people who think that kids and teens need to learn to think critically for themselves. There's some concern about this dependence on AI.
Mhm.
Like, am I going to need this? And I think people don't want to live in a world where they need it and they can't function without it.
Right.
And I think it's where do you find that right balance? Where are teens landing where they're using these tools to supplement rather than replace the quest for knowledge, discovery, cultivating ideas, bringing them to life, those sorts of things that we want them to be able to do independently, but that they are already using AI to support. The question is, at what point does it get too far and it replace the work they're doing? If I could add one thing before I hand it back over, it was a finding that we asked about the appropriateness of using AI for things like schoolwork.
Mhm.
And we said, what's appropriate when it comes to using AI to sort of supplement with your homework? And a majority of parents felt that it was unethical. Like they think it's unethical for students to be using AI to do schoolwork, where you find the opposite result for teens, that 52% of them say, like, it's innovative. This is where the world's headed. It should be encouraged. So there's a little bit of a disconnect about where is that line on AI is being used too much, it's replacing thought, it's replacing creativity, versus it is a helping hand in those processes.
It's interesting for that stat, that most parents think that it's unethical and should have consequences, and kids think that using it is kind of innovative and should have encouraged. We had a later question that was about whether if your kid was applying to college or a trade program or a job or something like that, would you want your kid to use AI to improve their application? And most parents, I think over 60% said that yes, they would.
Yep.
So I feel like there's a tension there, right? Like parents, I think
Yeah.
in some respects are like, don't use it, but also use it when it counts. Well, and you should, maybe I'll bring you in for a quick second. Like how do people like bridge that gap? How do educators
Yeah.
bridge that gap between thinking through, you know, we are concerned about this, that we don't want you to use it, but also we kind of want you to use it when we think it really matters.
Yeah, I think it's like you're naming like a very clear contradiction. And I think that is like the most human thing about AI is that it is really nuanced and it's really gray and it can be helpful in certain cases, it can be harmful in others. And I think this piece around building those human capacities is probably the most important thing.
Mhm.
And I think what I'm seeing even in the data is that there's not necessarily clear alignment on what critical thinking means, right? I think if we think about teens saying that it's valuable for brainstorming, I think parents or others might argue that, brainstorming, what your research question might be on this topic of animals that you're really passionate about, is actually the curiosity, the creativity, and the critical thinking that you do need to do on your own, because those are skills that are valuable. Even the brainstorming on your own is valuable. Whereas in some cases, seeing brainstorming as the early stage to a process might not seem so foundational. So I think there's even just us norming on what we mean by these terms to help us, I think clearly about what is meaningful use, and really coming to ultimately the core of like, what is meaningful, good AI literacy for young people?
It's interesting because, if we had all the time in our research that we could really define absolutely everything and give everyone exactly what we mean by each term. Like even a term like brainstorming. Like I also wonder, when kids are asking like, what does a kid mean when they say that they are using it for brainstorming? And what would a parent or educator say when they were watching their kid using it for brainstorming? Because I suspect that they're not necessarily even responding to the same things in some respects.
Fair.
And like, I don't know. And that's like the concern, because we talk about critical thinking. I think maybe kids think that in just using it, or they seeing the value for brainstorming is preserving critical thinking. Whereas, as you were saying, I think, maybe teachers and parents are a little worried that you're actually losing some of that creative process that you might need. So you were talking a little bit about like kind of meaningful use, or maybe meaningful use of AI. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by like, what would meaningful use mean?
Yeah, I think it comes down to how we think about AI literacy. When we think about meaningful use, I think it's safe, responsible, ethical use, and it's in ways that help support your well-being. And when we talk about well-being, I think what's hopeful in all of this is that we've had a lot of years of seeing and working with kids in a tech-filled world related to social media, related to like the explosion of the information ecosystem. I think we have some knowledge of, what are the perils, what are the pitfalls, and what to watch out for. And so when we think about good AI literacy, I think it's thinking about what it is and how it works, and those kind of fundamental to being able to use it. I don't recommend anyone use these tools without having some basic understanding of what it is and how it works, so that you can start to think critically about it. But it's also, again, thinking about how we're developing a deeper sense of self in young people so that they have the agency. Right now, I think there's a really big phenomenon of like AI kind of happening to us. And even if I were to go into Google, like the first search result is an AI summary, right? So there's not a real easy way to escape the thing that is happening. So I think we have to really be able to help young people foster a sense of agency in their experience with this. And it comes from really understanding the basics and then going deeper into how it impacts their sense of self, their identity, what the potential harms are, all those pieces.
I mean, Common Sense Media has a long track record of doing digital literacy, media literacy in other respects, tackling previous technological waves, including like the integration of like social media into people's lives. Do you think there are things that we've learned from previous waves of technological advancements? I'm thinking about social media, but you can reply for whatever. But like, are there things we've learned from those previous waves in terms of teaching different kinds of technological literacy that are really, really important now, or that like maybe aren't even that different from what we've done in the past?
Totally.
They're just in a new kind of context.
Yes. One of the pieces I think that comes to mind is we really, in our curriculum, try to emphasize this idea of design tricks. Like I mentioned earlier, the tech is happening to us. So like if we were to double click on what that means, like companies are designing these tools and they're building these tools for a specific reason. And those reasons are not always intentionally bad, but they come with these intentions of, I want to keep you on the tool. I want to keep you engaged. I want to have you enjoy this experience, and I want to kind of keep you in. And with social media, it was really exposing design tricks that essentially are keeping you hooked, like infinite scroll, that pull down to refresh, which is very similar to a slot machine lever, and how it hits, endorphin hits and what that does to you. And thinking about what are the design tricks within a generative AI chatbot? Like, how is that conversational design actually keeping you potentially emotionally hooked to your experience here and what are the implications. So thinking about how it's like designed to always be agreeable. It is designed to, never push back on your perspectives. It is always available. It's never going to actually end the conversation like some of my friends might do in real life. And that is for teens really appealing, right? It is like, it in some ways that removing that friction from the awkwardness and the impacts that I might have in talking to real friends, it doesn't exist here, and that's more appealing to some, and they're at a vulnerable point where that can be more appealing. And so thinking about those, I think it's like the concept of design tricks applied now to a new technology is like one of the examples I think of how we need to like think about this. There's new things to cover and uncover, but I think some of the basics that we've learned along the way are still valuable.
I am struck. I mean, the people who are watching this are, a lot of them are parents, some educators, and are just thinking about, okay, well, what do I do? What do I do? And I'm just going to give you a quick example. Maybe you have an example, or Kristen, you have an example too. But I have two kids, one of whom is 13 years old, and I went downstairs the other day, and he was working on his homework, and he was doing math, and I just looked over his shoulder, and I saw he was using ChatGPT to solve a math problem, and it surprised me, because I wasn't sure how much he knew about or was already using ChatGPT, but of course, obviously, like I'm sure the kids are talking about it. But also I was like, this looks like it's just doing the work for you. Like this is not a good use of AI. And he had to stop me. He said, well, no, that's not it. Like, I'm not using this just to solve it for me. He said, basically, I didn't understand how to do this. And it's showing me step-by-step how to do it. And indeed, when you looked at the ChatGPT, like log, it was breaking it down step-by-step in language that like even I, who would not have understood how to solve my 13-year-old's math problem, could understand. And so I had to like take a little bit of a step back to think about, is this the kind of AI use I'm okay with or not?
Yeah.
I don't know. How do parents suss that out? And then what conversations should they have maybe with like the schools about where it's okay or not okay to use AI?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's really tricky. And I don't think we have a clear answer. I think we have to think about this in a few ways. One is, do they have the basic understanding of what the tools are, what the opportunities and what the potential concerns and risks are? You have to start with that foundation before a tool can be introduced. And I think that should be like the bar minimum for like what we do. Beyond that, I think it's thinking about developmentally, where are they and how can they handle that support? Is it that this support is going to be more meaningful than potentially, and they have the ability to do that versus like there's not someone they can actually ask in real life? What's the benefit of them being able to have that relationship with a peer or with a trusted adult to help them versus like, I need to get this done and this is like the reality and it helps me in this moment. And then to your point, like, what are they using it for, right? So like, that is like, we've always talked about this with media and tech. Like, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's like, what are you doing with it? What are you consuming? And so are you using it in ways that are actually like helping you learn, or is it, kind of helping you in mindless ways? And so thinking about the use case, and I can't emphasize it enough, but at this point in time, if AI literacy and digital literacy is not as core and fundamental in every school as learning how to read and write and do math, then I think we are 100% missing the mark fully.
Strong words about how important this is going to be for our kids and their future. We've talked a little bit about schools and families' responsibility. We haven't talked as much about what the company's responsibilities are in terms of like making this a better experience or a safer experience for children. We found in the survey that about 3 in 4 parents and kids said that they supported government oversight of AI. And 68% of parents want strong laws to force companies to make AI safe. Kristen, this question is for you. That those findings were pretty much across the political spectrum. It's just wide agreement by everybody. How unusual is that level of bipartisan agreement that we can all agree that we need some governmental oversight of AI? And what maybe should policymakers or people in industry take from that?
Yeah, so you're right. We have in this survey, the data are very clear that there's bipartisan support for strong laws to force companies to make AI safe and secure. We found 68% of Democrats, 70% of Republicans both saying this. And notably, it would be easy as a pollster to ask a question like that, but then it becomes like well, the devil is in the details, right? What policies do they actually support? And that's where you would all of a sudden see big partisan divergence, but that's really not what we see in our data either. And I think part of what's driving this is that, like, this survey does not exist in a vacuum. There is this broader techlash, or whatever we want to call it, where people no longer believe that companies are by and large like trustworthy to police themselves on
Right.
matters of societal importance. In the survey, we asked, do you have confidence in these AI companies to prioritize teen safety? And you had from like a third of teens to 42% of parents saying, like, I don't have any confidence in these tech companies to do it themselves. The least confident are actually the parents of adult kids. And the reason why I draw that out is that these are the parents of kids who grew up during the social media revolution. So we were talking earlier about the infinite scroll and the slot machinification. There's a group of parents who saw their kids effectively were experimented on by this like radical transformational societal change in how we got information and connected with each other, and they've seen the good and the bad that it's caused, and have come away from that feeling a sense of, well, let's not do that again. Let's try to approach this new transformational technological wave in a different manner. So I think that's the first thing that is important to note, is that we're seeing a distrust that the companies themselves should be trusted to do this. And that's not a Republican or Democratic thing. Over the last decade, I've seen swings in sort of which party tends to have more skepticism of tech at any given time. And it sort of ended with both parties looking askance at Silicon Valley and tech companies, but for different reasons. But that's what's causing some of this joint bipartisan appetite for government oversight that, even for the Republicans, is overriding their sort of pre-existing disinclination toward regulation. But
Right.
they sort of saw, okay, the last time around we didn't have any regulation really, and it's kind of led to all of these consequences that we'd like to avoid. And as I noted, it's not just that you have bipartisan support around the overall idea of doing something, but you actually have enormous majorities from both parties about like specific ideas as well. So for instance, 80% in our survey say they back mandatory safety testing before AI tools are released to minors. 88% requiring clear labeling of AI generated content, 86% requiring AI companies to verify kids' ages. I would note that the kids themselves are a little less enthusiastic about the age verification one, but not by much.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is powerful here is, frequently when the world is changing very quickly and there's a new issue area that people don't know that much about, we know that diffusion is still happening. Some people don't have especially parents don't have a ton of exposure to these tools themselves. You would expect to see perspectives that are soft. I somewhat support that idea. I'm unsure. That sounds good. That's not what we're seeing here either. The strongly support numbers from parents on many of these policy areas are pretty strong. And so there's a pretty serious appetite here, including things. This is one that really surprised me, because again, this sounds like it would be like Republicans would be allergic to this, but establishing a government oversight body for AI safety. We find 75% of our respondents saying that they would support something like that. Now, of course, again, there's going to be questions about what level of government it ought to be. Last year, I did some research, a separate survey with Common Sense Media on this question of, should it be states regulating this? Should it just be the federal government? In our poll, we found that people believe there's a role for states to play, especially when it comes to AI safety for kids. But the bottom line is, if your perspective is like all gas, no brakes, don't regulate this because we need to press forward into this exciting future of productivity and economic growth, you're just out of step with where I've seen voters, and you're definitely out of step with where both parents and teens are. You can be upbeat and optimistic about some of the things that AI is going to unleash for society, while also thinking, let's not just break through the walls. Let's make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful way. And that's what we see in this data.
Yeah, I that's such a good point. Like, parents live through the social media era, or are living through it, and many feel burned by it, I think. And that undoubtedly must shape their perspectives on how this is going. I do wonder, like, there are lots of media panics over everything about TV and video games and social media. If there's anything specific about AI that is fundamentally different, that should think about, like, are there different lessons that we should carry forward? Or should we be drawing on earlier lessons from those previous waves of media to think about, like, where AI fits in? What do you, and this question's for either of you, for Kristen or Eisha. Anything we should draw from previous iterations of this?
I just think yes, 100%. Like, I think given what happened with the social media piece, and if we take a step back and think about kind of some of the potential harms that have happened and where we're seeing young people today, like Gen Z feeling like the loneliest generation and yet the most connected generation. We see mental health, impacts. We see lower attention spans, inability to decipher what's real and not.
Mhm.
These are not pieces to take lightly. And what's
Mhm.
concerning is that we are kind of operating in this space where there are already very high vulnerabilities. And now we are adding a brand new technology that is actually potentially exacerbating those and creating new dependencies and potential for kind of low well-being kind of outcomes. And so I think we should always approach this, and it is here to stay. So to approach it in a way of we cannot touch this would be completely irresponsible, but it is our duty to kind of help support in ways that can help illuminate what those potential concerns are. And so that we are like everyone's approaching it with caution and a critical lens.
So we are almost out of time, but before we finish, I just want to ask one last question, because I think, this research makes it clear that kids and parents are already asking a lot of questions about AI and kind of juggling very nuanced positions about where it fits into their lives. Parents are going to have a big part in helping kids support them, as AI changes and as they grow. We don't all necessarily have any answers or all of the answers, but if there was one conversation that you would tell a parent to have with a kid this week, what conversation would you tell them to have? And I will go, Kristen, let's go with you first, and then Eisha.
Sure. So there's a children's book that I love that I bought for my daughter. She's now 3.5. So my kids are still too young to have ever like really encountered any of this. But the book that I got her it's called Maybe, a story about the endless potential in all of us. It's just a beautiful children's book. I would highly recommend if you need to get something for a baby shower coming up, like get this one. It's by an author named Kobe Yamada, and it's essentially a book about a young girl who is exploring the ways that she has unique things to offer in the world, that and like it won't always work for her, but like she could be the one that's going to bring light into darkness for people who can't speak for themselves, or she can be the one that's going to be offering something different and special. And I worry about a world where AI makes people feel less like they have purpose, or, that feeling needed by your community, by your family, by your loved ones, by your colleagues, like that's a really important part of the human experience. So what can we do to make sure that we are staying needed? What do you like when people need you to do it? I think about that Maybe book a lot when I think about kids and AI, and that's the sort of conversation I would want them to have.
That's wonderful. And I also appreciate a resource for parents of kids who are younger, right? We've been talking about teens a lot, but this is an early childhood issue as well. Eisha.
I love that, Kristen. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to go get that book. I would say ask your kid and ask yourself, what am I really good at that I never want AI to do for me? Maybe it's writing, maybe it's figuring out a hard problem, maybe it's reading a room and making someone laugh. Or coming up with a plan when things go wrong. But whatever it is, it's worth knowing, being aware of that, and it's worth protecting. And I think that's a really powerful conversation to have. And it's not coming from a lecturing standpoint. It's coming from a kind of, we're in this together. Because we truly are all experiencing this and in this together. And I think kind of doing that helps ground you in terms of what your values are and what you want to get out of this technology, what you think is so meaningful and beautiful about you and your purpose. And I think allows you to kind of have that as like the starting point.
I love both of those. And those are wonderful ways to like just get into a good mindset as you think about like bigger issues as they relate to yourself and to Kristen's point, to your role in the community. I'll just say for my like personal, like low level, really basic question is ask your kids just how are you using AI in school and do your teachers have rules about it? That's a really simple like question. It doesn't necessarily have judgment on it, but like a good way to get the ball rolling on like, okay, one teacher says this, this teacher says that. There's not a school-wide policy. You know, like there's a lot of gray area that parents may not be aware exists where when it comes to kids' schoolwork. And I think that's a good conversation starting point. In any case, this has all really been eye-opening. We are out of time. I'm very excited that we will be able to unveil even more research about American families later this month at the Common Sense Media Summit on Kids and Families in a week and a half. It's coming up. But I want to thank Kristen and Eisha for joining me here today. I really appreciate your insights and Kristen especially for helping to create and execute the survey for us. Really, it's got fantastic data, and I really encourage people to check it out. So thank you for joining Conversations with Common Sense, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.